And we're back here to talk about WandaVision once again, and if you don't know how these videos go, welcome. I'm Destiny, and this is Nerd News with Destiny. And I've been recapping all of WandaVision, where we talk about things that we know for sure, things that the show has told us, things we speculate wildly about, or things we don't know but kind of think we know. And then things we don't know, all the things we have questions about. So I won't delay. Without further ado, let's talk television. Let me consult my notes, color-coded, as they are every week, because I'm real type A. Alright, so we're gonna start with the things we know for sure. And first and foremost, we're in the 90s, baby, and I was born in 1992, so this was right up my street with a Malcolm in the Middle-esque type beginning. And then also, of course, as I've been waiting so not so patiently for, Wanda was in her comics outfit, and I was so excited to see that. She looked so cute, and Vision also looked hysterical. I liked that it was a themed Halloween episode. I think that fits the sitcom thing just perfectly, and I really enjoyed that. I would love to see more of Wanda in her comics outfit. I know that that's ridiculous because the MCU is set in modern times and nobody wears superhero outfits really, except like Captain America, but it was like functional. Anyway, and we learn pretty quickly, Pietro is crashing with Wanda and Vision, and he's doing great with the boys, and sort of our first lead-in to this episode is through Tommy and Billy's point of view, which was super cool. We have of course, the Malcolm in the Middle cut to the, break the third wall camera talk, where Billy's sort of talking about how Wanda and Vision have not quite been the same for a while. And that's because Vision isn't playing along anymore. He and Wanda seem to be on, like, okay terms, as in they're joking around with one another, and there was even the quintessential 90s parents making sex jokes in this. Why? Why was that a thing in the 90s? Anyway, we learned that Vision won't go trick-or-treating with Wanda and Tommy, and Wanda makes this offhanded comment like, well, that's not what you're supposed to do, but we already know that Wanda can't control Vision anymore if she ever had control over him to begin with. And the boys have their powers, which is so exciting for me. I've talked a lot about how I think they're setting up for the Young Avengers, but we'll get into that more in the section where I speculate wildly and you look at me confused maybe. But it's so fun to see that Tommy gets his speed, just like Pietro has. And Billy, later on in the episode, exhibits some telepathic powers, much like Wanda has, which is in line with what goes on in the comics. And he's even dressed as Wiccan from the comics, which is so cute. That's his little Halloween costume. But for some reason, Tommy wasn't dressed as Speed. But whatever, I guess. Pietro knows something's up. Now, us as viewers, we know that something's up with Pietro because it's not Aaron Taylor Johnson who played Pietro in the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's Evan Peters who played Pietro in the Fox franchise of X-Men movies. So, pretty interesting. They keep bringing up things from their childhood, which is really interesting because theoretically, that Pietro didn't grow up in Sokovia, because that's a made-up Marvel Cinematic Universe place. And also, theoretically, his father is Magneto, as they hinted to in the Fox movies, but Wanda and Pietro keep talking about their parents. So it was a pretty interesting thing. We even got a flashback to them as children, allegedly, I guess, in Sokovia, which was interesting because we don't hear a lot about their backstory before they volunteered to be, I guess, experimented on by Hydra, to put it simply. Wanda doesn't quite trust who he is because he looks different, as they joke about a couple of times. Even in the intro, they're like, Pietro playing himself, which is funny and also, of course, a nod to sitcoms. But she's kind of like grilling him about things that she thinks only the real Pietro would know. And they have this sort of heart-to-heart where, he's like, you can trust me. Like, I'm not your husband. All I remember is being shot to death like some chump for no reason. And I have to imagine that Clint Barton, with his terrible family arc that nobody asked for, is somewhere just like, because he died saving Clint. Anyway, eventually Wanda opens up, and this is something else that we know that I don't think we really knew before. Wanda's memories from before Westview are shoddy at best. And we're finding that people in Westview, like Vision has expressed this before, he doesn't have any memories from before Westview, which is pretty interesting, I think, and I'm going to get into that a little bit later. So we also know that Wanda, she's in control, right? But she's losing it a little bit. And we know that because Viz, instead of going trick-or-treating with the boys and Wanda and Pietro, he says he's going on the neighborhood watch, but he's not really. He lies, and he's going toward the outside of the hex, where as he gets further and further away and closer to the boundary, he's finding that people are acting like weird extras in a movie, like maybe doing the same motion over and over. Or the closer he gets, they're not moving at all. And he tries to interact with them, but there's just like nothing. But you see one of the people who sort of is just doing the same action over and over with no progress, and like a tear slipped down her face, which definitely indicates some of the things that we've been told before, that this mind control is painful, and you know, the farther away from where Wanda is controlling things, a little more of reality leaks through, even though they're not animated like people, which is pretty weird. And that leads me to my next point. I think Herb, who we've seen before, we've seen him do weird things, like the one time he was using like hedge clippers or like a saw, and he was like sawing through a cinder block wall instead of sawing his bushes. It's not a saw. What is it, like a hedge trimmer? I don't know. I rent an apartment. I don't have to. Anyway, he says to Wanda, much like Agnes has said before, like, do you want me to change something? And it's more innocent than when Agnes said it, because Agnes called her right out for just like, do you want me to take that again? Like it was a TV show. And Herb's was more sort of innocuous, but also you get the sense that Herb knows a little bit more than perhaps your average bear, right? Which is pretty interesting. I'm going to speculate wildly about that later. We also learned that Agnes is somewhat under Wanda's spell, I guess, not to use like witch terms. But as Vision is trekking out toward the edge of the hex, he runs into Agnes, who's sitting at that intersection of Ellis and Rolling Hill, where Wanda later tells the boys they're not allowed to go past because that's the edge of Westview, and he finds her sort of frozen in her car. And he's asking her questions, and she's kind of engaging, but not really. And then he does the little temple touch thing like he's done with Norm, and she sort of panics, and she's like, am I dead? And he's like, why would you ask that? And she's like, well, because you're dead. And Vision doesn't remember who the Avengers are because Agnes thinks maybe he's there to help them. And she tells Vision that nobody leaves Westview because Wanda won't even allow them to think about it, which is pretty interesting. I mean, we've seen people have moments of lucidity basically back from Wanda's mind control before, but this one I felt was really telling. And they're really hammering home the whole witch thing. She's dressed as a witch. She has a witch laugh. You know, we've talked about this. I think that she's Agatha Harkness from the comics, and you can give that a Google or watch my previous episode on this, and I'll tell you all about Agatha Harkness and how convoluted the comics can get. Alright, we know for a fact that director Hayward sucks. Not only does he not like powered people, but also he's a misogynist. So that's fun. But while learning that director Hayward sucks, we are also confirmed something we already knew, but I'm going to put it on this list, that Jimmy Woo is incredible. I am a Jimmy Woo stan. He's amazing, and he always comes to the aid of his co-workers and always speaks up when someone's being disrespectful, particularly Hayward. But Monica and Jimmy standing up for Wanda once again against director Hayward gets them kicked out of S.W.O.R.D., along with, of course, our favorite scientist, Darcy. And so that brings me to my next point. Our Fave 3 are going rogue. That's Monica Rambeau, Jimmy Woo, and of course Darcy Lewis. They're being kicked out of S.W.O.R.D., but in this very kick-butt scene where Jimmy Woo and Monica are like kicking the butts of some soldiers, and Darcy's just like cowering in the corner. Tag yourself, I'm Darcy. We learn that they're sort of going off on their own to try and get some information from S.W.O.R.D. because they don't think that Hayward is being 100% truthful. And he's not, so. We also learned that Monica's physiology had changed because of entering and exiting the Hex. So we learned in the previous episode that her x-rays and her blood work were super weird, like her x-rays were blank. But because Darcy is able to hack into what's going on with S.W.O.R.D., including a bunch of like Hayward's records, she finds the blood work for Monica and says that she's changing on a molecular level. We talked about how she is a mutant called Spectrum in the comics, but it's pretty interesting that it seems like she'll be getting these powers without the X gene, which is the thing that allegedly turns mutants into mutants. So I think that's pretty cool, and it also opens up a few more questions that we'll have later down the road in this video you know how it goes. So also, while Darcy is digging through Director Hayward's stuff, she finds a really important piece of information, and that is that Director Hayward wants Vision, right? He's tracking Vision inside of Westview instead of Wanda, and I think that that is majorly important, right? I'll get to why later, but that's definitely a fact, that Director Hayward is watching what Vision... But that's definitely a fact. Director Hayward is watching what Vision is doing, and he's interested in the moves that he's making. Curious. And Vision exited the Hex once he found the barrier, and as he did, his body began to decay, which was pretty crazy and also sad to watch. Darcy was like, why is nobody helping him? They're all just standing there watching him like fall apart as he fights to get out of the Hex. And Director Hayward seems even happy about it, right? He's like, oh, he really wants to get out of there, huh? And Vision is like dying, and they're all just like standing there. But Darcy gets handcuffed to a truck because she's causing some problems. She's like, help him. And she was supposed to have been kicked out, right? And this is another thing that we know. Wanda expands the Hex. She uses her powers to expand the Hex to save Vision. And that's because Billy, who hadn't exhibited any powers before, even though we had seen Tommy sort of speeding around getting his speed powers, hears Vision telepathically, which again says that he has Wiccan's powers, which are pretty close to Wanda's in the comics. Like a little different, but pretty close. And he runs to her panicked because he knows that she can fix it to some degree, right? Which I think is both sort of encapsulating of the innocence of children who think that their parents can fix everything, you know, but also speaks to his real understanding of what's going on, which is interesting and like a little sad, but also like a little exciting. So Wanda expands the Hex to save Vision, and then also Darcy gets sucked in because she's stuck to that truck while everyone is running away, but most of S.W.O.R.D. isn't fast enough, right? And Wanda turns them into the circus that they are because she is a queen. She turns the agents into like mimes and clowns, and you know, it's all very sort of funny, but now there are more people in Westview for Wanda to have to sort of spread her powers even more thin, which could be problematic, of course. But Jimmy Woo and Monica make it, and they're not sucked back into Westview, because they're on a trip to see Monica's Man Over the Hill. We'll talk about that later. And by later, I mean soon, because this leads us into the time where we get to speculate wildly, which is truly my favorite part, because, you know, I am a big nerd, but comics nerd, and Wanda Maximoff stan. I have loved Wanda for a long, long time. I think she's awesome, and I've been largely disappointed with her portrayal in the MCU, but I think they're doing a really good job of sort of doing a little bit of work for her. She deserves it. So, speculate wildly with me. So the big sort of speculation that I have is that Wanda is maintaining Westview to save people. So here's why I think that. I think that Westview existed before Wanda got there. I think that she's just helping to maintain it, and there are a few things that point to that. One, her lack of solid memories, like before Westview, which was a big reveal to me in this episode. And then also, because the color of the Hex is blue. Now, I know that that seems very minor, but it was blue until Wanda turned it red. Remember when she came out of the Hex in the previous episode to basically yell at S.W.O.R.D.? It was an incredible moment. I was very excited. Yeah, so I think that Westview existed, but I don't know why, obviously, but I think that Wanda is controlling the people inside to protect them. And I think this because Wanda's my favorite character for like a lot of reasons, but mostly because she exhibits compassion and empathy and strength, even though she has almost no reason to. In the comics, over and over, she just gets hammered. Like, sometimes they kill off Vision, sometimes they kill off Pietro, sometimes they kill off her kids. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, she just suffers a lot. And she exhibits strength while also being very flawed, right? And I don't think that the MCU would stray so far from that characterization that she's full of empathy and compassion in the name of grief, right? That would make this a story about basically female hysteria, but with powers. And I would be deeply disappointed if that were the case. If they were making her out to be like the actual bad guy because of her grief. I think it'd be a big middle finger to mental health. I think it would set back a bunch of her character progression. and just be an all-around bummer. So I'm gonna have some faith, please don't burn me, MCU, please, I'm begging you, that this is all in the name of saving these people against, I don't know what, but that will explain why she's taken such extreme measures to keep everyone in there. But also she benefits from it, right? Of course, like having the kids and Vision and now weird Pietro. And that leads me to my second speculation, that the sword footage of Wanda is doctored, which I said last week, but it plays into the idea that, a couple of things. That one, Hayward wants Vision. I think he was trying to turn Vision into a weapon, which is expressly what Vision did not want, which is why he didn't want anybody to resurrect him. So I think Wanda was going in there and she was collecting his body to save him, right? So maybe the footage isn't doctored, but maybe it's not presented in the correct context, right? And Darcy finds out something really big on Hayward's computer that we aren't privy to, because Vision crawls out of the hex. That we aren't privy to because Vision crawls out of the hex and all that calamity kind of goes on, so I'm sure we'll figure it out in the next episode. But I think that that's the information she may be finding out, is that Wanda went in there, guns a-blazing, because she wanted to save Vision. Which leads me to an interesting theory that I heard somewhere else on the internet, that S.W.O.R.D. is building Sentinels, which would fall in line with Hayward's hatred of powered people. So basically Sentinels are these giant robots and they cause just havoc for the X-Men. If you watch some of the X-Men movies, the Sentinels are in one of them. But basically they're giant robots that have like this AI that they can seek out mutants and know who mutants are, and they have like this whole registry of mutants and they just go around and try and eradicate them. And the idea is that they're eradicating a threat before it can become a threat, which, yikes. And that maybe they were trying to use Vision to create those Sentinels if they haven't already. I thought that was a pretty interesting theory. It's plausible, certainly, and that would be pretty cool. But I think they'd have to introduce more mutants into the fold, unless they're going to do like a weird Sentinels Marvel superheroes crossover that isn't like super X-Men centered, which is also possible. Food for thought. I speculate that Herb is someone, and I know that's like vague and annoying, but like, is he S.H.I.E.L.D. or S.W.O.R.D. or Hydra? Like, he knows too much. He knows too much to just be like a normie like Norm. You know, I think there are people there who they interact with who are just like victims of what's going on, and then you see people like Agnes, and people like Herb who seem to just have like a little bit of a leg up in terms of like what they know. So I'm interested to see who he becomes, if he becomes anybody who's like a familiar character to us. We'll see. And we're seeing Monica become Spectrum, right? The mutant. I don't know if they're going to call her Spectrum. I don't know if they're going to call her a mutant. They have the ability to do that now since they bought the Fox properties. But who knows? Because she's getting her powers through having gone through the barrier, which is something I sort of talked about in a previous episode, where I wasn't sure if she was going to develop her powers naturally, like through the X gene, or through Wanda's powers or whatever. So it's really cool. I hope that we get like a full-fledged Spectrum and we get to see her flex her powers in this series, because there's only 3 episodes left. But I'm rooting for her. Okay. I still maintain that they're angling for the Young Avengers. Look, Billy and Tommy are one age up fit away from being Young Avengers age. And if, like I think, they will be bringing in Doctor Strange to try and help Wanda. In the comics, Wanda flees after House of M, after the reality is restored and she depowers 90% of the world's mutants. She flees and they find her, the Young Avengers find her amnesiac and engaged to Doctor Doom. Which leads me to my next theory. Buckle up, buckaroos. I know I said that last week, but you're not ready for this one. I think Monica's man on the hill. Alright, let me back up. Monica says she has a way to get back into the Hex. She says that she has to go talk to the man on the hill. And this is before Vision breaks out and all heck breaks loose, right? And her and Jimmy Woo get into the car and they're going toward this man on the hill, right? Now, man could just be like a general term, but let's say he's a dude. Theoretically, he's going to be a smart dude to help her get back into the Hex. Like, very smart. Like Reed Richards smart. So, I think they could be going to Reed Richards, who is a scientist, and that would be your Fantastic Four tie-in, that would be your Agatha Harkness tie-in, and that would be your Doctor Doom tie-in. Now, she could just be going to Doctor Strange. You know, like, we know he's going to show up, so she could just be going to Doctor Strange, and I'm just, like, spiraling in this, like, conspiracy theory, just, like, alone in my room, like. But it would be super interesting, and I think that the groundwork for that is there. Because, of course, like I said last week, I still maintain that Agnes is Agatha Harkness. Her name is even a portmanteau of Agatha Harkness, Agnes. And they really just, I mean, they couldn't have beat you over the head with it anymore this episode. You know, she was dressed as a witch. She had the witchy laugh. She had a giant blow-up cat in her front yard. And in the comics, Agatha Harkness has a black cat that turns into a giant beast black cat. So, you know, come on. However, I think it's pretty interesting, in the intro of the show, they show Agnes with that very early 2000s sort of sweatsuit on, right? And the butt says naughty, which is very early 2000s and pretty funny, but I think, you know, Marvel doesn't do anything without intention. And so I think that may be saying that she's, like, up to a little bit of no good, but it didn't say, like, evil, right? It said, like, naughty. So I think maybe that might have been a clue as to, like, Agatha Harkness's intentions. But I don't know. Agatha Harkness has been both a friend and a foe in the comics. So, okay, so let's say the man on the hill isn't a man. Fair enough, it could just be a saying that I'm not privy to. Maybe, possibly, they're going to see Shuri, who's also super brilliant, and I would love to see lumped into something like this. And possibly Riri Williams, who is called Ironheart in the comics, and she sort of takes over who might be a Tony Starkish type person, right? She has the Tony Stark, like, what do you call that? Suit? I wanted to call it the Iron Man suit, but it's not. It's the Ironheart suit, but you get the idea. Sort of the AI created the suit, give you powers that a normal human wouldn't have, and resilience, because it's armor and it has, like, shooty stuff. Alright, that wasn't a very good explanation. But I would be interested and really excited to see, first of all, another person of color, and second of all, just, like, a really smart young woman. Like, we got that in Shuri. She's hilarious and she's brilliant. But I would love to see that, because I mentioned this before, but, like, the MCU has attracted, like, a lot of people into enjoying comics content. Maybe not comics directly, but comics adjacent content. And having, like, a young woman who's, like, a very successful scientist would just be very cool, you know? Yeah. I mean, we have that in Darcy. I just mean, you know, like, one that does superhero stuff. Oh, and here's, like, another one that nobody asked for, but I think Wanda's probably the reason why we're getting all the Spider-Men in the Spider-Man movie. In the Spider-Man movie, it's untitled right now, but in the cast we see Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield, who of course played Peter Parker in previous franchise launches of Spider-Man, and I think that something's gonna happen, and Wanda's gonna rip a hole in some realities, and that's how we're gonna get these other spider dudes, just like we got Pietro, you know? Alright, look, this one's super dumb, and it'll be the last one before we talk about the commercial that was in this episode. Wanda gets upset at Pietro because he is interrupting Billy while Billy's trying to focus and find where Vision is after Vision left the Hex and he's in danger, right? And it's sort of a pivotal moment. Wanda needs to know where he is so she can go save him, right? And I think probably keep him out of the hands of Director Hayward, of course. And she blasts Pietro and he falls into some hay bales because they're at, like, a Halloween town festival thing. And I swear to God, if Pietro gets up from those hay bales in the next episode and he is Aaron Taylor Johnson, I'm gonna lose my mind. But I would love that. Is that, like, 0 IQ, or is that, like, mega mind, big brain? I don't know. Alright, and so the last thing I want to talk about in this sort of speculatory section of this video, wow, I couldn't have made that any more boring, huh? Is the commercial. A couple of things. It was dead on a 90s commercial or early 2000s commercial, which was hysterical to me. in sort of an Easter eggy type way. There was also, if you noticed on the billboard of the movie theater, if you noticed, there was also, it was said it was playing both The Incredibles and The Parent Trap. Now, movie theaters play whatever kind of movies they want, but The Parent Trap came out in 1998, The Incredibles came out in 2004, so it's just kind of funny that they're just like showing you the span of which all of this stuff might have been relevant, and this commercial was just, I swear to God. Why were talking sharks, so big in the 90s, first of all? I have questions. And second of all, this commercial is for yogurt, which was also huge for some reason in the 90s. I remember like Yoplait and Go-Gurt so well. Trix yogurt also. But basically, the shark has this magic yogurt called Yo Magic, and he gives it to a little boy who's stranded on an island, and the little boy can't open it, so the little boy just perishes. And the little tagline that they put in this commercial, like they have in every commercial, that's definitely like a little Easter egg, is Yo Magic, the snack for survivors. And I can't even take myself seriously. And I saw on the internet that some people were speculating that this is about Billy and his inability to like access his magic fully. Okay, I respect your theory. However, I'm going to present a different one. I think that this has to do with the town at large, right? I think that this plays into the theory that Wanda is keeping people there to keep them safe from some bigger unseen bad force, and that without her magic, they would die, just like Vision. I mean, he left the Hex and he was going to die. He was dying. And like Pietro, I mean, he done dead. So I think that it's saying that without Wanda's magic to sustain them, people would be dying, right? And because of her magic, they're survivors. Which is pretty interesting. But I don't know. There are lots of things I don't know. I'm speculating with like my comics brain. I have all this knowledge up here and like nothing to do with it. So this is what I'm doing, right? But it leads us into the portion of the video where I ask questions that I have that I hope get answered. Here's things we don't know. How will Darcy be affected by entering the Hex, right? It did something funky to Monica, theoretically turning her into Spectrum, as we know her from the comics, but how will Darcy's physiology be affected? I don't know. Who is this man over the hill? Is it Reed Richards? Is it Doctor Strange? I just think it would be weird if it was Doctor Strange. Like, how does Monica know Doctor Strange? I know she's friends with Captain Marvel, but it just seems, like, Captain Marvel and Doctor Strange are just, like, hanging out. At least not in the MCU. To our knowledge. We'll see. Is it Riri Williams? Is it Shuri? I don't know. I'd be down. But I'm excited to see who that is. It's going to be some sort of guest star in the next episode, I'm almost positive. Will Vision have his outside memories because he exited the Hex? Now, Monica was under Wanda's brainwashing, allegedly, inside of the Hex while she was inside the Hex, and when she got kicked out, she could remember both what was inside the Hex and, of course, herself before, you know. So I wonder if Vision having exited the Hex will give him back his, like, Avengers memories and, like, you know, his Endgame memories, and hopefully not the memory of him dying, because that was sad the first time. And the second time. Will the real Pietro ever come back? Please. I'm sick of this one already. He's annoying. Please. I don't love the characterization of Pietro, especially in this episode. I know he's supposed to be like the Uncle Jesse, right? And like the fun reprieve, but like Pietro in the comics is a pretty dry dude, like dry and sarcastic, and that's what makes him funny. And also that's what makes him kind of a foil to Wanda, because Wanda is sweeter, you know? It's fine, I guess, but I'm hopeful. What's the modern setting gonna look like? Like, I was all about, like, the late 90s, early 2000s aesthetic, but presumably we're gonna be in, like, out of the early aughts and into, like, the 2010s or so, and then is it gonna go into the future? Because there's 3 episodes left, so, like, what? And this one's a bummer, and I hope it's not true, but in the end, will Wanda lose everything and just be alone? Like, she's so close to having what a lot of people want, which is just like her version of happiness, right? Kids, being a wife, you know, having nice neighbors. And it's like a bummer. It's a real bummer. My girl has really just struggled enough, in my opinion. I don't know. what do you think? That's my last question for this What We Don't Know. What do you think? Are you enjoying WandaVision? It's so funny, and I really appreciate it. All my friends and my parents are like, we just watched WandaVision, like, what is this? Like, it was so good, and so I love hearing that, and I would love to hear it from you. And you can find me on Twitter, where I talk about a lot of stuff. Nerd stuff usually, and I post pictures of my dog who's like super cute, so it's worth the follow, and I would love to hear what you're thinking about WandaVision. I also have a TikTok. How many times am I going to make this joke because I'm hip with the children? It's a comics centered TikTok where I talk about a lot of this stuff just in 60 seconds and hope that teenagers don't bully me. Alright, that's really all I have for you. I'm really loving these WandaVision recaps. Thank you for sitting through this video with me. I do appreciate you, and I hope that you have all of your own wild conspiracy theories about what's going on in Westview, New Jersey. Like I said, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you, and I hope to hear about all your wild conspiracy theories about WandaVision, because it's so fun to speculate, and it's so fun to read all of these, like I said, conspiracy theories. But I will catch you guys next week, same-ish time, same place, and until then, this has been Nerd News with Destiny.